Today we're talking quality hay production, so stay tuned, we'll be right back. Hello everyone, welcome to Ag News. Today we're going to be talking about hay production, or quality hay production I'll say, and John Grimes, today would have been a beautiful day to make hay, I think, if it was ever ready.
It gives us at least optimism that it's just around the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's just a little warmer, I'd say everybody would be having the itch to do some type of field work, either corn or soybean planting, and you know, we're not far from hay harvest time. It seemed like an appropriate time to talk about this today because we've been talking about the problems this winter that farmers have faced, largely because of weather and the mud, but also hay quality. It wasn't as good, and we'll talk about that as we go through today. You know, this is, if you're a livestock producer, this is a really good scene. This is a nice mix of grass and legumes. You see some red and white clover in mixed with a cool season grass, but looking at that, it appears to be maybe orchard grass. That's kind of a nice combination for grazing or haying purposes, and we'll talk about some of the implications of that. First of all, we talk about fertility. Every ton of forage produced by an acre, either through grazing or haying, it's not a free lunch. We do take nutrients out of the soil, and this chart is from the University of Kentucky, talks about removal rates for a ton of hay, and they're very similar, but you do notice with straight alfalfa you have more nitrogen removal. Now, the one thing we keep in mind that alfalfa and red clover would be legumes that help fix nitrogen, so this is the raw number of removal, but notice that P and K are very important to forage production, and so if you're producing 3 to 4 tons the acre, which is probably pretty close for a lot of good production situations, there's significant nutrient removal. So I think farmers need to remember that, whether they're replacing it through fertilizer applications or manure or whatever. There's got to be, you got to put, if you're taking it off, you got to put something back.
You need to put it back.
Right, exactly. So this is a really busy chart that may be a little hard to read, but what we're talking about is the ideal time to harvest these forages. In the previous slide, you saw the bloom of clover and red clover and white clover. You didn't see a seed head yet on the grass, but Mother Nature is really good about indicating when we should harvest the forages, and generally it's the beginning of the onset of the bloom. And with grasses, we're talking about the seed head, and on legumes, we're talking about that bloom. You know, red clover, white clover, or alfalfa, which has that purple flower. So that's kind of an indication. And generally, most of these species, boot is right before when the head starts, or late bud, and then early head. Because every day that it's in head or flowering stage, quality's going down.
That's what I was going to say. The quality seems like it goes down.
It gets more mature, more fiber, and we'll show some more graphic demonstration of that.
Sure.
Here's some work that was done at the University of Tennessee on fescue and how maturity impacted protein and different digestibility. Also, the thing you need to keep in mind, animals can eat more high-quality forage than they can poor-quality forage. It's easier for them to digest.
Okay.
So think about if you're eating a high-fiber diet.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing.
Okay.
Same principle. So late boot cut versus early bloom to seed forming. You can see how dry matter intake went down. These were Holstein heifers. They were able to measure how much they ate. The digestibility goes down. Protein content goes down. it also took more feed to get the same amount of gain, and you can see on the far right-hand side the pound a gain per day. So when we talked about the effects this past winter, a lot of this started a year ago when we made poor quality hay, and today we're just talking about what we can do within the limits of Mother Nature. If it's going to rain all the time, there's not a lot we can do about that, but why it's important to manage some of these things. You know, this is a scene that I know most livestock guys enjoy making hay. It's kind of like mowing your yard. When you mow a field of hay and you see it mowed down, it's kind of rewarding.
Yes.
And these machines, you can widen or narrow up the rows as it comes out the back of the machine. This is, I would say this looks fairly normal. It's not a true windrow, but it's not fully spread out. You can see this one's a little narrower. It looks more like a windrow coming out of the back of the machine. You can set those flaps at the back to decide how wide that swath is. And there's a lot of debate on this. I know there's some school of thought is if we have a narrower width like that, the ground will dry out more and it'll improve drying conditions. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't it not dry the product?
It doesn't dry. It may dry the ground, but it doesn't dry the product. It's well put. Your goal is to get as much dried down as quickly as you can, and when it's in a windrow, it just doesn't do that. Wide swath lets you catch more sun on the forage. And to get really technical, that light keeps the leaf stomates open longer, so it facilitates drying. So a narrow row is better for the ground, but actually for the forage, it's better to spread it out. So that's something we need to remind. Now this is a field that looks like it's been cut for a day and a half under normal conditions. You see that nice bright blue sky in the background. Hopefully it's not a lot of humidity and all that, but with first cutting, especially when we have more moisture in the ground than we do later in the season, we probably need to do this, spread it back out. And so I want to emphasize that every process we do when we take a piece of machinery across the field, we're actually causing hay loss. You know, this process does help beat some of the leaves off of the stem, and so you have to weigh the importance of getting it dry. You know, this doesn't look quite as bright as the one before. Maybe it's rains on the horizon in the next 24 to 48 hours, so you're trying to speed up the drying process. So you're taking that more narrow swath, which you notice this one you don't see as much gap between the hay, but now you're getting it really spread out to hopefully dry quicker. Now we're going to rake it to make it ready for the baler. You see back there in the left-hand corner, you see another tractor coming along. It might be the baler, but you also see some of the dust flying up behind the machine. That could be some of the leaves being shattered, and then we bale it. So that's kind of the process that every farmer goes through. We do typically see most of the hay in Southern Ohio being made through large round bales. And so that's what we're going to probably talk about the most as we go along here. Now, moisture level is very important. You've heard over the years of barn fires. You know, people make hay too high moisture content, and there are some slight variables between the form of the hay we're making. The small square bales definitely can take just a little bit more moisture, but even with that, don't want to go past 20% moisture. Large round bales, little drier, and even the large square bales, which you don't see as much around here as probably you do out west. Large commercial hay producers, you'll see the big rectangular type bales. Or if you see semis hauling hay across the highways, usually they're in the larger square bales than round bales. Round bales are harder to stack on a trailer and haul.
Now that always confused me, John. I put up a lot of hay square bales when I was a kid. And we would always say, well, we can't put it up wet because it'd burn the barn down.
Well, after
we were like, does that make sense if you're putting it up wet?
Well,
shouldn't it not catch on fire? Well, but it's the heat.
It's the heat, exactly.
Where it tries to dry.
It's the fermentation process, and when you stack a large volume together, it's amazing how much heat can build up in that core, and that's what we're talking about. If you're gonna make it wet, to me, wet hay would be like 30% or higher. We're just talking about wet being over these ranges that we're talking about here. So you know, it's a little bit of of slang there, but you got to keep it in mind what the ultimate goal is, how we're going to store it. And we're going to get to that here in a second. This just shows some of the losses that can happen from making it too dry when you rake it or bale it. And ultimately, the one I want you to concentrate on is the far right-hand column. Total percent loss of those different categories. Actually, the hay, we can lose easily a third of the hay if we rake it too dry and bale it too dry. And this is probably more dramatic with legume content. The higher legume content, it's a little easier to beat the leaves off of a clover or an alfalfa plant than it is a grass.
Right.
Okay. But we definitely can lose protein. We can lose total digestible nutrients, and this is again reflective of quality. You know, how much are we losing of what we originally started with? Now this is a graphic design that I think really can spell out how important protecting this product is. If you talk about a 5-foot diameter bale, which is pretty typical in this area, the outer 6 inches has a third of that bale. You think about it, it's a lot bigger wrap around the outside than versus the core, and this is just graphically showing that almost 60% of the bale is in the outside foot.
But isn't it the outside, like that first 6 inches or so, a lot of times we'll end up losing it or make it much lower quality
if you don't protect it. Exactly.
And so we're losing almost a half, or could be degrading, I'll call it, a half a bale of hay every time.
Depends on how you store it.
If you just don't store it.
And that's what I want this slide to emphasize, that is the importance of protecting the outer layer of the bale, because that's pardon the slang, but it's low-hanging fruit. That's the quick stuff that we would lose, and so it gets more dramatic to the outside of the bale than it does the inside. So I think that's a good graphic demonstration of why we need to protect this hay. Now this is a pretty typical scene. I'm going to show some pictures. You can see some bales here that look fairly weathered. There's nothing special done here. Those bales are laid on sod. Yes, they're away from trees, which is a good thing, but a lot of people, you'll say, well, I'll put them at the edge of the field under trees. That's one of the worst things you can do, because when they're under trees, when they get wet, they don't dry out. They retain the moisture. So that's something to watch. But there's a fair amount of loss going on right here in this situation, and we'll talk about that here in a couple slides. Now this is a great situation. You see that hay. Now I'm not sure how old that hay is. It might have been baled a few days beforehand, but bottom line is it's protected from the elements. It's got a roof over it. Water's not going to settle underneath. It looks like it's a pretty well drained spot. Maybe sets up a little bit. That's a great situation. And I can tell you that when I show you some of the loss figures, people say, well, I can't afford to build a barn. I would challenge you to say, yes, you can. If it's a simple open-sided structure to the east, it might be money well spent if you make enough hay. Now you'll see this situation where you see what I call a pyramid or a triangle stack of bales, and I understand why people do it. It's saving space, but if you don't protect those bales, you are going to lose a significant amount of hay, because the water will settle between the layers if it rains, and you'll get excessive rotting, and that's not a good situation. If you want to do this, you need to do this situation, put a tarp over it and protect it. And if you notice, if you look really close, there's a layer of rock underneath. That hay sets up a little bit higher than the soil line, and that's very important.
That's good
to keep
for drainage.
For drainage, exactly. So there's ways we can not break the budget and protect the hay. Now this is okay. You look at two bales here. One's obviously a little older, weathered bale to the right, and then we've got appears to be a more recently baled round bale on the left. But even with inside storage, and whether it's round bales or small squares, whatever, there's going to be a certain amount of dry matter loss. I mean, just through aging and whatever, hay does not stay the same this year versus 2 or 3 years down the road. But outside storage, we can lose up to 40% of what we baled. And you start talking about what hay is worth. Let's just say, and this would be a low figure today, if hay was worth $100, $100 a ton and you're losing 40%, those are real dollars. I mean, that's significant dollars. So this is under normal high conditions. We get typically 40 to 45 inches of rain. Last year was much more. We're off to a pretty good start this year. This is work I've used from the University of Kentucky. They do a lot of good work with forages. You know, if you're going to have a conventional shed or a tarp on a pad, which was the pyramid picture I showed you, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7% would be pretty typical. If you have these sleeves that go all the way around the bale, that's kind of the situation. But when you start not protecting, if you just do a basic thing, put the bale on a rock pad, you're still going to lose over 10%, up towards mid-teens. If you just put the net wrap and put it on the ground with no protection, you could lose up to a quarter. And if you stack it like those situations where I said, the pyramid. Without a cover, you're going to lose over a third of them. And that's just not good management practice, and I can't emphasize that enough, that we need to watch that going forward.
Is that percentage? Is that a 1 year percentage?
Yes. It would go down more with age, but most years farmers are using up their supply, and I would encourage you, if you have the ability to protect some and unprotected, get the unprotected fed first. And if you got it in a barn, you can either leave it or do something different with it as we go on. So the bottom line is, from the time that forage is cut to the time we feed it, a lot of times we just don't do a good enough job of protecting it, and it goes.
We're throwing money away.
Well, it's kind of that Chinese water torture. It's a slow loss that you don't all happen at one time. But if you think about from the time you start cutting to the time it's fed, we can do a lot self-inflicted damage on how we manage it. So that's the theme today, Duane. I just wanted to wrap up with this site. This was something I saw this winter that I thought was quite humorous. Wasn't a real. It was just driving along the road, saw this bale out, and it did not look like a high quality bale of hay, but they took the effort to try to protect it when they fed it. It looks like to me maybe they should have done a little more effort prior to feeding it to protect it and maybe make a better quality bale of hay. So that's maybe a little extreme example, but I wanted to show that, and again remind folks that the OSU Extension Beef Team has a website. If you go to beef.osu.edu, you can see a lot of good information, our weekly newsletter, quality assurance information, a library, lots of good resources. I'd encourage folks to go check that out.
Great. John, again, great topic, timely. I can't imagine how people could ask for more. So,
well, I appreciate it, and again, check out the information at the website.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back.